Hello and welcome to the Rev Up, the podcast where we talk about all things marketing and sales and revenue growth. Today, I'm actually joined by an old friend, somebody who was a former client, somebody where I was a former client of theirs, Emily McLeod, who is the co-founder and director of WOW Recruitment, which is a Sydney-based consultancy operating across sales, marketing, digital, and business support in terms of the types of roles that they hire for. In 5 very eventful years, including obviously across the pandemic, Emily and her team have really won the trust of some of Australia's most recognizable brands when it comes to finding great talent for them, and at some serious scale, right? Emily's a very impressive entrepreneur, to the point that, you know, this what was a one-person band has grown substantially and actually ended up winning some awards. There's an awards series in the recruitment industry called the Tiaras. WOW Recruitment actually won the Rising Star Award in 2021 and the best small recruitment company to work for in the 2022 Tiara Awards. Emily is excellent in the areas of sales, in the areas of branding, in social selling, and I think in the areas of leadership too. So today's going to be an awesome conversation. Let's fire up, crew. Welcome to the show, Emily McLeod.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it is an absolute honor and a privilege. Every chance I get to have a chat with you is always a good time.
You too.
I'll tell you what, I always like to share like kind of how we got to know each other. And I actually think this is a good story to share because obviously we're talking about like business growth, we're talking about sales, and we're talking about marketing. So we actually met because I was recruiting a sales role. You reached out to me because of that sales role. We caught up, and then I actually became a customer, right? So it's kind of the perfect conversation for us to have about kind of how we met, because we met through sales and marketing ultimately. Do you remember how that kind of all happened? Do you remember that happening, coming and meeting me in Sussex Street?
You know what's so strange? I walked past the cafe that we met in for the first time. I walked past that cafe this morning. It's called Socialite, and it's down the bottom of that building on Sussex Street. Darling, you know where there's that sign for Darling Park? And there's that cafe. So it's the first time we met. But yeah, I noticed I'd been following the entourage for a while. I'd been connected with you for a little while, I think, as well. So our strategy is always to have you in our network for a little while before doing that cold outreach, to build that awareness and so that I'm a little bit familiar before I reach out. Even if you don't realize I'm familiar, in your subconscious, you've probably seen my name 3 or 4 times, ideally. So
I love that. I love that.
Yeah. So when I reached out to you, I'd been following the entourage for a little while at the time. That's where you were at that time. And you advertised a BDM role, and I reached out to you and just asked if we could chat about it. I didn't really have any expectation, but obviously I wanted to talk about the role, but it was more of a networking, relationship building type of outreach message to catch up with you. So, and then we went for coffee. You were so kind to come back to me. It was the beginning of the year too. And we ended up having a coffee. And then I remember you were a hard negotiator. I do remember that part. And then the rest is history.
Well, I think I ended up hiring 3 different people through you guys. And I've got to say, like, the whole experience, and I know I embarrass you sometimes when I say this when I introduce you to people, but the whole experience was hands down the best client experience I ever had working with a recruiter, right? Obviously, not long after that, I got to meet Dan as well, your business partner in WOW Recruitment. I think at the time when we met, Dan was kind of doing part-time stuff in WOW Recruitment, and you were kind of...
It was only 1 day.
That's right. Yeah. And then you guys joined in at the entourage. So we were like each other's clients at different times and all of that sort of stuff. And, you know, a bunch of business growth milestones and various celebrations later, here we are.
Exactly. You're a good salesperson. I always say that you ended up getting me too. So I got you first, but then you got me back.
That's it. That's called the Uno reverse in sales.
Yeah.
Should never buy something without also selling something. So what I think would be really good is maybe give, you know, the listeners a little bit of the maybe half a glass of wine story of kind of how you went through this process. Like, I remember one of the first things that we ever connected over was that we both started in the whole like commission only sales type environment, which I always find really interesting when hiring salespeople for my own teams. How did you kind of go from like, you know, walking the mean streets, convincing people to buy stuff through to now, like, you know, founder of a fast growing recruitment agency?
Yeah, good question, because I actually started when I came out of high school, I studied architecture and then engineering. So that's even more far-fetched from getting into recruitment. But I was studying engineering at the point where I went into sales. I was lucky, I think, in the sense, or not lucky, but I'm so grateful for the fact that I went into a great sales organization where I could learn so much. So I actually joined Daniel's sales organization, who's now my business partner. So I joined his organization and they were doing commission only sales. And that's where I got to really learn the sales craft. And I think commission only sales is so defining for your character. And I think everyone should do it. I know that's not realistic, but I think it would be beneficial for anyone who's in a customer facing role to actually get a taste of commission only sales, because you start to realize that what in sales, and it's for any sales role, what you put in is what you get out. And I think it's a great mentality to have to sales, and you can always do more. And it's so much about the way you show up each day that defines the outcomes that you achieve. So that was great training ground. I got to learn things like body language and tonality and the way to present and different sales tactics and impulses and the importance of a process in your sales. And I quickly moved into a training role when I was there. So I started as a sales rep and then went to a team lead role and then more of a management role, where I quite quickly had a team of 25 people reporting into me in the first 6 months that I was there. And the reason why was because I was able to articulate my sales process, teach it to others, show them how it works, and then everyone just copy. And it was so foolproof that you had backpackers and young people coming out of university like myself who were just following a process and able to have success off the back of that. So that was a pretty defining moment for me in my career, because I realized that if I can systemize something and have a process around something, I can scale success. And I'm so grateful for that lesson. If I took anything from that, it was that lesson. And obviously the belief came with running a team. So I went from that was commission only. Naturally, I didn't want to do commission only forever. I started to get more responsibilities and started to grow up a bit and wanted more and wanted to go more into that corporate space. We're selling products. So we're in shopping centers and, as you said, on the streets. And I wanted to get a grown-up job. And so I didn't really know what I wanted to do next, but I started interviewing at recruitment agencies for sales roles. And for anything really, I was quite open. I was quite lost at that point. And I ended up meeting a recruiter and she said, have you thought about doing recruitment? So like most recruiters, I had the story of falling into it, which is actually something I'm quite passionate about changing in the industry, because a lot of people do just fall into it. But yeah, I fell into recruitment and absolutely loved it. And I wasn't amazing at it to begin with, but I could see the potential of it. And then a couple of years in, Daniel and I reconnected, and we'd always worked so well together. We've got a good dynamic and we complement each other's personalities. We're so different, but we complement each other. And we were at lunch and he said, when are we going to work together again? And he put the idea to me of starting an agency. My first response was, hell no, I am not ready. And that seems really scary. And I'd have no idea where to even start. And it seemed so hard. And then I went away and thought about it. And I thought, if not now, when? Because I didn't have a mortgage. I lived at home. I was 22. I was in a position where I had nothing to lose. And I had a healthy dose of being overly naive and optimistic. So I probably didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but I think that served me well. It's turned out okay. And that's how we got to opening WOW. And it was a combination of absolutely loving recruitment. And recruitment is a lot of it is a lot of sales and sales process. So my skills were being used in the sales space, but it was loving recruitment and enjoying the process of that, actually enjoying the day-to-day grind. And then having someone, like a person that I knew I'd work really well with, and having belief in our partnership. I never for a second doubted whether we'd be successful if Daniel and I started working together. And I think that is something that not everybody finds. Having a co-founder that you really back and truly believe in and rely on and trust is huge. So I think that's been a big part of getting me here. Someone pushing me there a little bit as well in the background. And then now we're here. And it's been 5 years.
5 years later. There's 3 things out of that I find super interesting. And I hope I remember the third one by the time I get to it. The first one is the last 2 guests we've had on this podcast. One went to university to be a chemical engineer and then decided not to do that and to do sales. The second one went to university to become a lawyer, got to the end of that, decided not to do that and went into sales. So we've got a bit of a common theme going here.
Yeah. I think the engineering thing is the structure of sales and engineering is where I find the alignment. But yeah, it's interesting.
The second thing is I don't think we've ever talked about this, but something I tell people all the time is when you're promoting to people to a manager, like as you build a business, at some point you've got to step up and you've got to manage through managers, right? And I tell people all the time, when you make that move, the person that you hire shouldn't be the best salesperson or the best graphic designer or whatever. It should be the person that is ultimately the champion of the process, right? Yes. Is that something that you've found in your business as you've kind of scaled up, that you need people that also really believe in and care and can teach the process?
Yeah, so I quickly learnt, and I think it's something in our industry in the recruitment space, but also something that's widely a challenge across sales, is that not every top sales performer makes a great leader or makes a great manager. And I had to learn that the hard way. When we first started WOW, I knew I wanted to have advancement and progression opportunity for the people that came into WOW, but I assumed everybody wanted to go down that leadership path. And so I think before we go into that, is there does need to be clear advancement opportunity for an individual contributor and somebody who wants to be a people leader, so that people can go in either direction and feel like they can meet their career goals and advance with the company, regardless of whether they're individual contributor or a people leader. And then, yes, I think someone who's going down that people leader path definitely needs to be someone who is systematic and can define and articulate what the sales process is. Because if it's someone who can't actually define what their sales process is, or even their processes in their role, how are they going to be able to replicate that or duplicate that as they train and as they upskill and impart that wisdom onto the people they're mentoring? So I think it's an absolute non-negotiable skill set, that they can articulate it and they're aware and then can teach it to others. Yeah,
I totally agree. That piece around the best salespeople don't necessarily make the best sales managers. I actually think that's true in most departments, right? The person who's the best website developer doesn't necessarily make a good marketing manager. I think it applies in a lot of places. But I do think that all of them have to know how it works. Like, I don't think you can manage a process if you don't know the process, if you don't know how it works, and if you can't add value to the people that you are managing, in the process that they're following, in the process that they're delivering. The third thing, before I forget it, was you talked about like the partnership with Dan. I think it's pretty rare that like entrepreneurship and business growth are a solo sport. It's not really like singles tennis, I think it's actually really like a team sport. what are the sort of things that you found like really matter when it comes to having, that person to bounce off? What are the sort of benefits, the things that you found are important in order to be able to utilize that partnership, utilize that relationship to grow?
I love what you said about it being rare. And I think when Daniel and I actually sat down to talk about launching WOW, Daniel had run previous businesses and he'd always run them on his own. And he actually made a point of saying to me, I never want to run a business on my own ever again. I'll only launch new businesses if I have a co-founder, because the reality is running it on your own is not only lonely, leadership is lonely. So when you're doing it on your own, running it on your own is not only lonely, but you don't have someone to challenge your ideas, challenge your way of thinking, and expand your way of thinking on a daily basis, because we definitely do that for each other. And you just don't have that person to have fun with and confide in and tell everything to. Like, there's no off limits conversations between us naturally. So yeah, that's been, I've never run it on my own, but it's been great to see his perspective and how grateful he is for having a business owner, because a co-founder, because it makes me have that gratitude as well. But yeah, the thing is, at the beginning, we probably didn't do it as effectively as what we could have. There was a lot of doubling up and a lot of duplicate efforts on the same tasks and trying to achieve the same outcomes. And it wasn't until we had more of a divide and conquer mentality where we split our responsibilities across the different pillars of our business that we started to get real traction. So Daniel's now ramped up to 3 days a week and I'm still 5 days. So he's started to do more. But we've also set ourselves really clear outcomes in different divisions. We're naturally such competitive people that he took marketing and I took sales. And it's such a healthy not competition, but I'm like, I need leads. And he's like, you need to convert the leads. And so it becomes a really healthy dynamic, because we expect things from each other and deliver higher results because of that. So he, as an example, took over finance, whereas I took over people management and operations and sales. So it became really clear who was doing what. We wrote job descriptions, which we never dreamt we'd do for each other, but it was the only way to become super clear. And we set it so that our remuneration was based on the exact projects we're in charge of, to give really clear accountability to what we're trying to achieve. And we cross over. It's not like, oh, I won't touch that. We cross over so much, because at the end of the day, it's our business and we're happy to wear multiple hats. But we were doing way too much of that at the beginning. It was a bit of a free for all, and it led to wasted time. And when you have a team, and as a team starts to grow, they need clear direction on who does what and who to go to for what. So as the team grew, we started to feel that was needed even more. So yeah, I think it's just about getting really clear on your job descriptions and communicating regularly. So we obviously do our yearly, well, I say obviously, I mean, it's obvious to me, but not everyone, but we do our yearly strategy session and we break that down into quarterly sessions. And so we'll do a quarterly strategy where we review the previous quarter and set up the next quarter. And then we have a weekly strategy meeting. So it's only an hour. And we don't talk about day-to-day things. We talk about pure strategy. And that keeps us on track and aligned with the goals that we're trying to achieve and the objectives we're trying to achieve for the year. And facilitating that open dialogue consistently so that we can talk about challenges and innovate and strategize has also been incredible for our progression as a business.
I think there's probably a really important lesson in that, not just for founders. I think there's probably a really important lesson in that for senior executives in most businesses. Having that person that you can talk to about anything, that you can tell the absolute truth to. There's no off, like you said, there's no off limits topics. If you're a marketing director, having that counterpart that you can have those conversations with, that you can have some fun and joke with, but, really get to the nitty gritty of things and someone to lean on, I think is probably really important for people in those positions too. Probably a similar sort of dynamic.
Yeah. And we actively spend time cultivating that relationship. I think it's so important. I hear in not only my industry, but so many industries where business partners and founders just, it falls apart and relationships break down and things don't work. And I've had so many stories actually in the last month from people I'm mentoring where they've got rid of their business partner and things have gone south. And it makes me feel grateful for what we have, but it is a constant conscious effort to cultivate that relationship and ensure that we're being open with our communication and telling each other what we're thinking and what we want, and being so open to challenging each other. And it's having a healthy, it's like any relationship, right? Like just having a healthy balance of everything. Yeah. So it's conscious effort.
Yeah, you hear a lot of people give like bad advice thinking it's good advice in business all the time. And the bad advice I hear the most often is like business is business, personal is personal. They should be separate. And particularly like people talk about that when it comes to leadership. You have to be able to have difficult conversations with people. And I've always thought like, who is the person that I could have the most difficult conversation with? It's the person that I'm the closest to, where they understand that I care about them as an individual person and they assume my best intentions in the conversation. People that I don't have a personal relationship with, if I come in telling them what they need to do differently and how they need to change, the wall is immediately going to go up and resistance is going to come up and they're going to start looking for another job. Right. I've always thought that about that piece of advice. And I love to hear you say that, like you have to actively and proactively cultivate those relationships, even if it's a business partner, if it's a counterpart in another department, like you have to have a personal relationship. Otherwise you can't, it's hard to hold people accountable. It's hard to tell them the truth about what's going on.
Yeah, and I always remember the quote. I can't remember who says it. You'll probably know. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Oh yeah, I forget who said that one too.
I put you on the spot.
You got me.
But that always is in my head. That people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think that's so important as a leader to remember.
Yep. Totally agree. I have a feeling it was like Tony Robbins or someone like that, but I'm probably
surely not.
Applying it to the wrong person. You know what? I'll tell you what. It's not a very good segue to it, but I really want to talk to you about branding. Right. So there's some core pieces in what we want to talk about on this show. Right. We break revenue growth down into 5 main pieces, and the marketing and sales elements of them are demand creation as the first one.
Yeah.
Like, how do we get people wanting to come to us? I've heard it described before as how do you beat Google? Right? How do you stop them going to Google looking for a solution because they're already coming to you because you're the obvious person to talk to? The second part is demand capture. Somebody has a need and they're looking for a need. How do we make sure that we're the person they find? And the third part being demand conversion. I know you've done quite a bit of work. I know you very obviously done quite a bit of branding work for WOW Recruitment and done quite a bit of like personal branding work. Can you maybe, I don't know if this is the best way to ask the question, but can you maybe like just talk us through that experience, what you found about branding and how it really helps you to kind of create opportunity?
Yeah. So I suppose I should probably go back a couple of years to explain this, because I was that business that was just chasing leads and like cold calling and hunting and spending all my time hunting, getting the lead, converting, hunting, getting the lead, converting. And there was no demand generation happening at all. And I describe demand generation as educating people to the point where they realize they need you before they would have otherwise. Like you create that need for them, or they decide they need you before they would have actually realized they need you, because you're educating them and they go, oh, I want a piece of that. Like I want to work with her because that would be awesome for us. But it's not been a need yet in their awareness anyway. So
yeah, I imagine that must be pretty important in your world, because like having been a client of recruiters for many years, you very rarely are thinking to yourself, I need a recruiter. Like the order in which you kind of go through the process, and sometimes like are resistant to the idea of a recruiter, you know, having to push through that rather than create that demand and generate that demand must make it a bit harder.
Yeah, and 2 years ago it was just constantly trying to bring down everyone's buyer's resistance. And when I'd be able to start the conversation, it would already start on, I've tried everything, I've already extended every resource, and you're my last resort. So every conversation, that's where we were at. Maybe even 3 years ago, actually, it was 2020. So when COVID hit, I took that time to really think about the business and the brand, and we went through a full rebrand. And that's when we got serious about branding. And that's when we brought on a digital marketing agency and started to get really serious about our marketing strategy and our branding strategy. And the reason being was because I was like, if we have gone through, because we lost all revenue streams during COVID, similar to a lot of businesses. And so because we're at an absolute standstill, and that's around the time I actually turned to you to go help me out, and we joined the program and went through a lot of coaching. But at that point, it was, okay, if we're going to make it through this, I want to come out the other side and make a huge bang and get lots of traction. And it's funny because now I meet people at awards events and things, and they say, you came from nowhere. Like after COVID, you just came from nowhere. I'm not going to come from nowhere. It was blood, sweat, and tears. But sure. So we spent that time really thinking about the strategy. So anyway, part of that was we wanted to really nail this whole demand gen thing. I've been working with clients in the US a lot at that point, and demand gen was a huge conversation for my tech clients over there. And we were starting to recruit head of demand gen, and I was starting to think more and more about what is this demand generation thing and how do we get some of that? And so that became, we started to go, well, what conversation do we want to own? And how do we build a conversation and build something that we're known for and get consistent messaging around that conversation? And so this year, the strategy, for example, is that it's all around building high-performing teams and work cultures and providing and building a great place to work and retain your staff. Because in this current market, in these market conditions, that is probably the smartest way to go about the talent shortages, is retention. And so we're choosing conversations we want to own and focusing on educating people in that space, adding value, and going into our sales strategy, I guess you could say, with the idea of longevity, relationship building, networking, and not thinking what's the outcome I'm going to get from this conversation from the very beginning. It's more around how can I add value? How can I build this relationship and network? And generally we could both maybe get something out of this, and it's a two-way dialogue. And how can we educate on our space? And then that's turned into our sales strategy. And then from that demand generation, people coming to us and us getting the inbound leads, for demand, you mentioned demand capture, and we do have digital marketing spend on paid campaigns for that demand capture, so that when people are Googling and actively looking, we can capture them as well. But once we have the leads, we now have such a simplified, yet it's not that complex, but a simplified yet really clearly set out sales process. So once a lead comes from awareness through to consideration to us converting it, we have a really clear process of how we can then convert that. And so it goes through our sales process, and everyone's trained on that. It's so foolproof. It goes back to what I was saying earlier around sales just being a process that is foolproof and anyone can follow, no matter what your skill set is. And so everyone follows that. And then we focus on training them on how to do that effectively. But the process is there. So we can focus on upskilling people's emotional intelligence side of things and the way they engage with somebody and their green brain thinking, as an example. You're obviously familiar with green brain thinking.
Yep.
So we go through that.
I don't know if our audience is, but it's not something I've really talked about on this podcast before. So just for a tiny bit of context for the audience, red brain thinking is essentially where you are talking about logical aspects of what your customer needs, what they're potentially going to buy in order to solve their problems. Green brain is very much the emotional triggers, the emotional aspects of how people make decisions. People make decisions emotionally and they justify them logically. So you do need both. But what Emily is talking about is essentially the emotional aspects of decision making.
Yeah. So we add that layer in, and all those things are just adding the layers, but the sales process is there for actually then converting that demand into happy customers. Does that answer your question?
It really very much does. And I love that what you talked about there in terms of like a simple sales process. Actually, the last guest we had on, Ross Ashman, actually said in that episode, sales is simple, but it's not easy, right?
Yeah.
It has to be simple, and there's kind of two parts to it. And one of them you talked a little bit about there. Like, it has to be simple in part because most businesses get built by a founder selling something, right? And because of their like sheer overwhelming amount of knowledge and connection with the customer and the volume of conversations they've had, they have a way that they do it. And that way tends to be probably like a high barrier to entry way to do it in terms of trying to hire other salespeople to do that. And so I think that that's like a really important aspect that people should take out of that is you have to, if you're going to build a sales process, it has to be simple because you have to be able to quickly onboard new salespeople to it, and they have to be able to deliver it without the years of experience selling this product to these customers that the founder or whoever had been driving sales prior to that has. I think that's like actually like an essential element for building sales process, and for building teams too.
Yeah, and I think another part of that was making our solution really easy to articulate for a new consultant coming in. When I was explaining it, it was a 13-step process describing our solution. And it wasn't memorable. It wasn't something that people could easily come in and pick up and just run with and be able to explain to somebody. They had to watch me do it so many times before they could really articulate it themselves. And I guess they weren't retaining the information. And I figured, geez, if they can't retain this information, how are the clients really retaining this and being able to make a decision on this? So we changed, we called it our 5 steps to recruitment happiness, because our whole purpose and mission and vision is all around recruitment happiness for everyone involved, being candidates, clients, and colleagues and community. And so we were like, let's make it our 5 steps to recruitment happiness. And it's our 5-step recruitment model. And we're able to explain our solution by explaining, if we were to work this role for you, these are the 5 steps we go through, and this is how we deliver. And this is what you can expect from us. These are the things that make us unique in each of these 5 points. Like, this is our USP. This is how we differ from other recruiters in each point, but it's a 5-step process. And it was so much more memorable for not only our staff to be able to pick it up and run with it and explain it to somebody, but also so much more memorable for our clients and customers, so that they could then take it away and explain it to other people who maybe weren't in the room and be able to sell our solution when we weren't around. And that was when we started to get game-changing results with our revenue, when we introduced that. So that's another piece of it, I suppose.
So just for some context, because obviously you guys have grown really fast. It's been super impressive to watch. What does the sort of customer acquisition process look like? What is the sort of end to end? How do you take somebody from without obviously giving away too much to any other recruiters that might be listening in? How do you take somebody from, a stranger to a customer?
So we generally run off the 7 touch point to 10 touch point model to conversion. But from a stranger, that's a good point. Normally, from a qualified lead onwards, I can explain that quite clearly. From stranger to qualified lead can sometimes be 5 to 10 touch points of sending salary guides or sending articles or sending blogs, and it could be just market insights. And we don't make it as thing where you've got to give us your information to download something. We give it all out freely. It's all just value add as much as we can give you, because if you've got all that knowledge, you'll realize how tough the market is, and you'll realize our expertise and our specialization in those markets, and you'll probably want to know more and have a conversation with us. And so I think it's quite, and on each of those, they're built with so much purpose. Like every single piece of material we send out is built to convert, and it's built for call to action, and it's built for someone to want to have a conversation with us. So whilst it's value adding, we've got an awesome marketing agency who are so creative about ensuring it's quite compelling to want to speak to us once you finish reading it. So we offer enough to entice the customer, but we obviously don't offer all, because at the end of the day, you still need to find the person to fill your team. So that's until that's like all our demand gen and lead gen piece. And then once it gets to qualified, once it gets to them speaking to us, our initial thing is a qualifying call. So we jump on a phone call with them. Generally, that's just discovery, qualifying. From that point, we're booking a discovery meeting. And that's all about understanding their business, unpacking their pain points, understanding exactly what it is. So once we get to the point where we're having a conversation with them, we need to qualify, we'll do an initial phone call. That's where we're asking questions, qualifying, ensuring it's an ideal customer for us. Because just as much as we want to get new customers, we need them to be aligned with our ideal client. So basically sense checking them against our avatar. Once they qualify, we'll book them in for a discovery meeting. That discovery meeting is all about understanding their business, unpacking their challenges, their pain points, trying to really understand why they're reaching out to us and where we can add value and where our solution might be. But we're not really offering solutions in that call, like that, or that meeting. It could be face-to-face or on Zoom, but that part is really about just unpacking and discovery, really.
Yep.
And then from there, we come away and we come together, we put together a strategy. And then the next meeting would be a strategy meeting where we talk about the solution we can provide as an agency and go through all our outcomes and deliverables that we would deliver for them, what they can expect from us, and put together a good project plan. And then from there, they go to onboarding. So that's where we partner them up with a good consultant. They get to know each other. We do a job brief, get the brief on the role, and give them a really, at that point, rehash what the project plan is and timeframes and what they can expect from us. And then we go out to market.
Yeah.
So it's quite simple. That can be applied to any business.
Yeah, and this is good B2B sales process. I'm really interested in you said earlier in relation to your content that that you kind of just give it freely. It's not, it's not really sort of like gated lead magnet-y kind of content.
Yeah.
Were you in the lead magnet space? Because I've noticed, and I know a lot of people are noticing that people aren't really that keen to be tricked into your sales pipeline anymore.
No, people are too smart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that something you sort of noticed, heard? Like, was that a conscious decision to say, we want them to come to us to talk to us because they need our help, rather than get them to download something and now we're trying to force them to have a sales conversation?
I think the customer is changing. Like anyone who is treating the customer how they treated the customer 10, 15, 20 years ago, even 5 years ago.
3 years ago, I reckon.
Yeah, like the customer is just changing so much. And we speak to our customers so much. And my role now, especially when I was on the tools and recruiting, I was obviously very involved in the customer. But now my role is talking to the customer in a really different light. I'm asking them for feedback on what do you want and what do you need and what do you expect and how can we differentiate from all the other recruiters that knock on your door all the time. And we're just listening to our customer, and the salary guides is just a value add. It's not what we do. It's not our service offering. We're not losing out by providing that to somebody. It's insights we're getting anyway from the field that we're working in, the market trends and everything. It's not what we sell, but it is what we see every day. And it's a way of us building credibility. It's a way of us building trust in a market that is so saturated. And if you can do that, I just don't think there's any point when the ultimate game is to build trust and credibility and brand loyalty. I just don't see the point in gating that kind of information. It's never, yeah, I just don't see the point. I mean, do you agree? I don't know if
I totally agree. Yeah, totally agree. Are you guys doing those salary guides for more than sales now? Because I know I've used your salary guides for sales roles before. Is that something you're doing like across the board?
Yeah, so we do it for every vertical that we specialize in. So there's a sales and account management one. There's a marketing and very digital focused one. And then there's a contact center and then just general office support one. So and it's everything from like all the roles we recruit for and that we have the insights on. So it's anything from entry level through to senior. And we're surveying people and getting that information to understand what our clients are actually getting paid and trying to ensure we're putting something out there that's valuable for businesses and even candidates to benchmark themselves. So it's valuable for both.
It's certainly something I've used before and found really helpful. So shameless plug, if anyone wants to figure out what you should be paying for any roles across those areas, make sure you jump onto the WOW Recruitment website and go looking for that guide. Some of the things that you've talked about in this session, I think I would personally like associate with you. So the branding piece is definitely one. You talked earlier about the importance of relationship building. I think that's another one. One that you you've kind of talked about, but not really specifically, is around the client experience stuff. Like I said off the top, my experience working with you and with WOW Recruitment was the best recruitment experience that I'd had. Was the client experience and the way you kind of support, communicate, all those things. Has that been like a really conscious decision that you've made? Is it something you kind of had to learn, or how did that kind of come about?
Yeah, so the client experience is something that's always been super important to me personally. And it was actually quite tough when we first started WOW to be able to replicate the care when it came to client experience when we first started building. And we've nailed it now. But in the beginning, it was a challenge to get people to care as much as I did. Naturally, as a business owner, I cared so much about my clients and about what we were doing. And it was part of why I loved recruitment. And not everyone had that care. And so it became part of our internal recruitment strategy. Like we recruit so heavily aligned with our values, and the values make up the people and what they're motivated towards and the way they show up every day. And so our values aren't just something that I say are our company values. Our values were formed originally by interviewing our clients, interviewing our candidates, and interviewing our team members. And we do that regularly to make sure they're still aligned. So our values are our values, don't get me wrong, but they're very heavily worded and created based on our leadership team coming together. And they've been very similar from the very beginning, but they've always been sense checked with and originally created by other people who actually can see how we live and breathe and what we do and can really vouch for the fact that they are truly our values. So you see a lot of these organizations that just say, yeah, they're our values, and you show up in their office and you think, you're fun? Really? Are you sure? So
innovation. Haven't changed a thing in 10 years.
Yeah. Their mentality is just the way we do things around here, but they say they innovate. So we make sure we really do live and breathe our values, but then we create decision-making metrics around that. So I mentioned before that everything we do is around recruitment happiness for our candidates, clients, colleagues, and community. And so that's a really clear decision-making metric whenever you're dealing with client. So there's some of the more high-level things like decision-making metrics, values, and everything being aligned from that side when you're hiring people and managing client experience from like an internal perspective. But then it's just about having like cadences and KPIs and processes around client experience. So all our expectations are documented around a client's journey and what they should expect in terms of levels of communication and delivery and timeframes on things. That we've got heavy KPIs that we track and monitor weekly. And I know that in recruitment that can be frowned upon, but we do it with so much purpose. It's never KPI for a KPI's sake. It's always connected to overall purpose and outcome of what we're trying to achieve. And from there, we celebrate that and really encourage that. And I think you encourage what you celebrate. And so every week in our Friday wrap up, we're always shouting out the team members who are excelling in client experience and who are selling in candidate experience too. It goes both ways. We're testing it with NPS scores so that we've always got a finger on the pulse, knowing exactly how our candidates and clients feel about us. And every consultant has a score, and we're always trying to get our scores higher. And it's something we take so much pride in. So there's the NPS and tracking and KPIs, and that's all worked into our system, into our CRM. So it's not reliant on manual work. It's all quite automated so that we can track that. And then it's inspect what you expect. I mean, if I expect my consultants to operate at such a high level with their client experience, I need to inspect that routinely and ensure we stay on top of it so the accountability is there. And look, most people do it naturally because they genuinely want to do well with their clients, but we train a lot of rookies. So it's just about instilling those habits. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides, they don't want to do right by the client. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the right systems and processes and skill set and tools to be able to deliver and do it well, things can sometimes go wrong. So we just have to inspect what you expect.
I love that. Inspect what you expect. Going and having where you talked about like not KPIs for KPIs sake, inspecting what you expect, like going and looking and figuring out what's going on, to me is like good people management. We say this to our our outsourcing clients all the time. You actually have to be involved. You have to go looking. You're not looking to try and find only what people are doing wrong. You're looking to find what they're doing right. You're looking to find what can be improved. But if you're never looking at it, it's a little bit like the Schrodinger's cat thought exercise, right? So long as the box remains closed, the cat is both dead and alive at the same time. I think of this with like processes. It's like, so long as the box remains closed, so long as we don't go looking, everything's fucked and everything's fine all at the same time, right? So you get you get the anxiety also of not knowing. Right? Not knowing whether your team's doing a good job, not knowing whether it's working until you go and look. And as soon as you look, if it is, pardon my language, fucked, don't worry, this podcast comes with an explicit label, just FYI. If it is, then you can do something about it. And if it's not, you can go and do something else, right?
Yeah, I mean, you need the information as a leader, you need the information and the data to be able to make decisions. I think you can't just be winging it all the time. And when we first started, we were winging it all the time. And don't get me wrong, we had levels of success, but nowhere near the success or the scale that we could have if we actually started. We basically got dashboards and started looking at everything and had a bird's eye view of the business so that you could make decisions with data. And I think someone like myself, I love leading people. I love seeing people succeed. And I think I can sometimes be a little bit too nice and give people too many chances. And it really removes that emotional side of leadership to being, it makes it more about data. And then you can have more structured and more relevant conversations where you're not having a critical conversation based on the way you feel about that person. You're having a conversation about the data and what's actually happening. And I think with a lot of people, they respond well to that when you've actually got the data and it's quite clear and you can show them what's happening and you can start to do gap analysis. So I think if data is missing or you're not looking at it and you're managing, how do you know where the gaps are? Because if the activity's there, right, but the outcome's not there, well, then there's something wrong with the quality of what you're doing. But if the activity is not there and the outcome's not there, well, then we know we need to increase the activity. So you can do a bit of gap analysis and you can look at the areas that the activity is and the areas that it's not. And you can start to say, well, if we pull this lever or if we do this, and as a leader or a mentor, you can sit down with that person, be able to see very clearly where the gaps are and where you need to work. And then you can get a high performing person and then a high performing team. But without that, when you're just winging it, it's very hard to know what levers need to be pulled. I mean, you can only rely on intuition to a certain extent, I believe.
I totally agree. And if you're having those conversations with people, like, look, not 100% of people work out in every job. There is a perfect job out there for everyone. This job isn't always perfect for this person, right? And that's okay. But what is not okay, I think, is somebody being let go and not knowing that it's coming, right? And not knowing why, right? If they have to ask you why, I don't think that we've done the right job in management up until the point that we've let them go. And 100% of managers at some point are going to have to let some people go. I know that's a horrible thing to think about, but it is what happens. I love what you said there, what you were talking about there in terms of leadership. Actually, like, over the few years that we've known each other, I've really admired your like growth mindset, your approach to learning, and I think that really shows up in your leadership. I see so many people in your business that have been there for quite a long time and seem to really enjoy themselves. I know it's hard to kind of tell that stuff from the outside, but it does really seem that way. What's your approach to, you've mentioned some things there in terms of your approach to leadership, your approach to team building. But what's your like kind of fundamental pillars of like, what do I want to be as a leader in order to be able to build great teams? That's a really hard question to answer.
That's a hard question. The first thing that's coming to mind, though, when you say that is human, like to be human and be authentic. That's coming to me. I know that's, and what I mean by that is, I think in the last couple of years, I've had to really exercise that skill, that muscle of being okay, being vulnerable, and being a little bit more human with my team. As a leader, sometimes you have to have all the answers, and that you have to know everything, and that you have to always make the right decision, and that you have to always be okay, even when things are super stressful, say during the pandemic, as an example. And there is a pressure to just have your shit together all the time, for lack of a better way to explain it. And I think when I started to really step into my role as a leader and really own that role, it's really been a journey. It's been a recent journey for me the last 2 to 3 years, probably 3 years. So it's all quite fresh for me. And I think I've been there, don't get me wrong, but I mean like truly stepping into it in a way where I'm proud of the way I'm showing up. And I think that journey has been about letting go of the expectation to be perfect and owning imperfections and going, sometimes I don't have the answer. What do you think? And encouraging conversation and encouraging, like, let's figure it out. Like, if I don't know the answer, generally when I'm by myself, I research, I figure it out. Like, I have such a figure outable mentality to things, like everything you can figure out. And so I started going, I don't need to have all the answers, but I can give you guys the toolkit and the habits that I have to go and figure it out. So that kind of thing. And then being a bit more vulnerable and real with people. And I don't think that's detrimental as a leader. I think it's empowering. I think it's relatable. I think it creates a culture where other people feel like they can be themselves. And I think when you do that and you have a really human approach to it, you see everyone else as a whole person, and it trickles through the way you do everything. I mean, I see, and you mentioned it earlier when we were speaking about looking after the whole person and caring for your people. And I think when you let down those barriers and truly just be yourself and operate in your own unique way and own your unique way of operating and have confidence in it, it does trickle through, and you then lead your people in that way and you encourage that of them. And then you get the best results from them, and then they feel like they can show up and be the best version of themselves. And I think it's led to more powerful conversations. It's led to people in my team, especially, really unpacking why they're here, why they're doing this, and what the ultimate outcome and ultimate goal is for them in life, and having bigger picture conversations and being okay sharing that, and being a little bit more vulnerable about certain things that may have happened when you're growing up that shaped the way you are and shaped your trigger points and shaped your goals and shaped your ambition in life. Like, if you can have those conversations in a workplace, I think that's so rare. And I think me becoming that type of leader has enabled that and facilitated a place, or created an environment people think that that's quite normal to do, and they feel comfortable to do that. And I think when you're tapping into that level of conversation with people at that big picture level, is what I'm referring to, the way of showing up in the office and doing your work and the outcome and result of that is just game changing. Like if you're not doing that, then you're leaving a part of people out of the office, whereas we're trying to get everyone to bring their whole self in and put it all on the table. We'll deal with it all. But that's me loving the coaching side. So I think like my approach is like coaching and developing my people. That's what I love. And having the mentality of, I wouldn't ask you to do something that I'm not willing to do, and we're all in this together, and I've been there and I've done it, and I'll get on the tools with you, and I'll pick up the phone and I'll show you what to do, and no one's beyond or above any task, and let's just get in there and do it together. And yeah, I don't know if that really answers the question.
I think it really does. That part about being willing to do things that you ask other people to do, I think that's one of those really, it's like a little action that you can take every day that makes a big difference to how a team feels about each other and about you. Like I first got taught that by my dad years and years ago. And then I've reread that in a few places. One of them is in one of the books I read about Ray Kroc, right? And the story of he would turn up to McDonald's stores and just walk around the car park and just pick up litter, right? I think sometimes it's just the tiniest little things like, you know, being a leader, but being one of the people that, pardon my language again, cleans the fucking kitchen in the office, right? Little things like this that you have to be willing to put in where everybody else puts in. And everybody's got their role to play. It doesn't mean that you have to, you know, be making 100 phone calls a day because that's what somebody else does in your team. But you better be willing to make some phone calls when it's needed. You better be willing to do some client meetings when it's needed. You better be willing to help prepare a presentation when it's needed. Like as you step up through the layers, you still have to be willing to do those things and take those little efforts. And whatever you expect of everyone, you definitely have to do, especially the kitchen example. I know that's one that gets on a lot of people's nerves.
No, I mean, I clean the kitchen regularly, but also we had a BD day yesterday. And the team set up the competition, and they created teams. They had 3 teams, and I wasn't in any team. And I was a little bit offended, but I didn't say anything. And they said that I'd have my own competition because I'm not allowed to be in one of their teams because it gives disadvantage anyway. And so I said that I wanted to be involved anyway. And so they all had their competition going. I wasn't part of it, but I just got on the phones and got amongst it because not only do I love being on the phones, but I figured, well, if you're all going to sit here and do it, I'm going to sit in the middle of the office and I'll jump on the phones and show that I'm also getting involved. And people learn from that, but it also shows I'm willing to get in there and do it with you. And so I think that it's crucial. I think leaders that do that normally have a lot of buy-in from their team, a lot of engagement from their team, a lot of respect, and are able to influence and get people to follow them, because I've seen it in my own career, like the leaders that do that. And even the ones we read about, like Emma Isaacs, who runs Business Chicks, in her book, Winning It, she talks about like running events and things because that's what they do for Business Chicks. And she said that she'll be there, the last person sweeping at the end of the day. And when you see her on stage, you think that she'd be the last person sweeping up or cleaning up the office and things like that because she's got so much going on. But she's got that mentality, and it's no surprise that she's got, you know, a very successful business as a result.
Yeah. I love that. You mentioned a book there. I like to ask everybody about this because, you know, I love to read. In fact, some of the best books I've read the last couple of years have been suggestions from you. Give me an example. What's the book that you remember having kind of like a fundamental impact? Something you read where you were like, this actually changes the way I do things and has had an impact in kind of where you've ended up. You can give more than one, by the way, but start with one.
Well, I have 2. So, and I don't know whether Yes, I do. Thank you. I don't know whether it's the book itself or the timing of when I read it and I just really needed it, but Radical Candor by Kim Scott. I think
That's
you've
one
read
of
that. I think we've spoken about
that's
this.
one of the ones that you suggested to me. Yes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was game changing. So I read it
Yeah.
in the first lockdown. So as I said, I think the timing of it was also part of it, but she just gives you such good frameworks for difficult conversations, one-on-ones, running team meetings, just getting the best out of your people. And as soon as I read that, I just changed the structure of my performance reviews, the structure of the way I was asking questions and my general conversations with the team. Like that book, I think every leader should read it. I use it as gospel. Like I'll often refer back to it. I've got things highlighted and sticky notes. And yeah, I'll go back to it if I ever want a bit of a refresher. And if anyone in my team is going through the leadership training and is moving into a team lead role, like you've got to read this book type of book. So
was there like a particular lesson, a particular thing that you now do that you got from that?
yeah, so one of them, I think naturally, maybe because we're so time poor as leaders and in what we do, is that when someone asks us a question, naturally we just provide the solution or answer the question. Whereas and that's just because it's easier. It's easier just to give you the answer and keep going with what I need to get done because we're so task focused. And what I got from her was some really good tools to be able to turn that back on the person and ask discovery questions. It's like qualifying. So, but ask questions like, well, what do you think? But if in your wildest dreams you could have an answer, could it possibly be? And get them to expand their way of thinking and to say things like, but what about this? And what if this happened? And okay, and if you did that, what could the impact be? And to start to ask really open-ended questions to get the person to really think for themselves versus relying on your brain and going to you for answers because it's so easy to do. That's something I took out of it that's always been very memorable.
Yeah.
Just
there's some lessons in that. Yeah. There's some lessons in that are very similar to, I don't know if anyone's ever read The 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey, an old Ken Blanchard book. There's a whole series of the 1 Minute Manager books.
Add it to my list.
Very, very, very classic management books. They're very small books that you can crack through them in like a day and a half. But one of the main messages out of that I kind of linked up with what I got out of Radical Candor is, I think too often we let people kind of just leave their problems with us. I don't think this is just a leadership thing. I think this is a teamwork thing in general, right? People feel like once they've told someone else the problem, they've now unloaded it and they don't necessarily now need to do anything about it.
It's like the monkey off the back topic.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the point of the 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey is that people are constantly walking around with monkeys and they're trying to put them on your back instead of on their own. And so they're like, hey, I've got this problem where I don't have a case study in the construction industry, right? And they'll tell someone that, and that person usually will go, oh, well, yeah, we should organize that. Or I'll organize that, right? Or they'll say, okay, and then the person leaves. The person feels like they don't hold the monkey anymore. Now the other person has it, and because they've told them about it, they've got to do something about it. And something that I took away from her as well was similar to what you were saying. Like, it's important in that moment to find out what they think should happen without being overly committed, because people won't necessarily want to give opinion. Won't want to tell what they believe. So what's the thing she says? She says, ask them, what's your opinion, right? Because everyone's got an opinion. You can take them, you can leave them, you can throw them away, whatever. People will be more likely to be like, oh, well, I think maybe we could try this. And if it's a good idea, then you say, all right, let me know if you need any help. And just being able to turn things around like that, I think, is not just an important leadership thing, but it's a interpersonal team member approach to take. Like, how do we help each other to take ownership of our own problems? I say to my own teams fairly frequently, unfortunately, whoever has the problem owns the problem. So if you've got the problem, what do you want to do about it? And I think sometimes, apologies for just kind of rambling on here, but you see a lot of leaders not want their team to come to them with problems. There's this approach of don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. But sometimes they come to you with problems because they don't know how to solve it, and you might have more information than them. The trick is just not taking it over and solving it, right? Sometimes they just need to feel like they can come to somebody and have a sounding board and all that sort of stuff. Talk about the problems, figure it out, but still retain ownership and still retain ownership over solving it too, and celebrate having solved it.
Yeah.
So I love that book. I'm so glad I didn't know that was the one you were going to mention. I'm so glad you did, because it was one of my favorite books that I read. What would it have been? Not last year, the year before. Yeah.
The whole chapter on performance management's good, like difficult conversations around bad performance. Like, she gives structure to things and frameworks and just good general tools, like how to navigate a difficult conversation. And the radical candor thing is her whole theme. I mean, but just for the listeners, the whole theme throughout the book is around having candid conversations and just being so open and radically candid about the way you have these conversations and the way you build these relationships with your team members, so that you can always be honest and truthful and have open communication where people aren't feeling like they can't tell you everything and they have to hide parts of things they might not be happy about or uncomfortable with. Like, you can really start to build good relationships with your team members off the back of it.
One of the things from I forget what it's called, but the Netflix founder's book is he specifies, have candid conversations, but with good intentions.
Yeah.
Very important additional.
Very important part of the puzzle. Yeah.
So, you go.
I was going to say my second one. Do I have time for a second one?
Oh, yes, the second one. Please. Please.
So my second one, this is a bit of a different one because I love an autobiography, was Green Lights by Matt McConaughey. Did you read that?
Oh, I haven't read it yet. I've heard a lot of good things though.
So reason why I love it is it's not a business book. So that's not what it's all about, but it's his story. He's obviously very successful in his acting career and everything else he's gone on to do as well. But he's just someone who really appreciates life. Like, he just loves life, and he just does not take anything for granted. And he's just really making the most of life. And I loved it because it just made me look at it, at my life really, and go, oh, hang on a minute. I could be really taking time to smell the roses, if you will. But appreciating the journey and appreciating every moment and realizing, because he wrote that book by journaling every single day from when he was a young teenager up until now. And he had so much self-reflection throughout that he was able to read back on things, and because he reflected every day and journaled every day, able to make more mindful and conscious decisions about where he wanted to go with things, both personally and professionally. Like, it's a real mix of the both. But that got me into journaling, and that was game-changing for me, and that stuck with me. So got me into frequent reflection and being a bit more mindful about the way I show up and the way I do things. So I loved that book as well.
Nice. Yeah. Any books that I think you got to mix them up. Some that really help you learn stuff and, very business focused. Some that are like, help you learn how to live life better too. I've been on a bit of a rabbit hole recently of like, sort of a bit more down the military motivational route. David Goggins and the likes, and just I know I told you before we started recording that I signed up for the Oxfam 100-kilometer trek. Basically, I blame that entirely on David Goggins for having read his second book recently.
It's like when you watch the tennis too much, then you want to be a tennis player. You're that person.
Exactly. I'm exactly that person. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Really appreciate you coming on. What would be great is, I think you should probably share a little bit of where can people find you and what should they reach out about. I can obviously vouch for the fact that they should reach out to you about recruitment, particularly in the world of sales and marketing. But where can people find you? How do they get in touch?
So I can be found on LinkedIn. It's just Emily McLeod on LinkedIn. Otherwise, our website is www.wowrecruitment.com.au. Otherwise, you can just send me an email. It's emily@wowrecruitment.com.au.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us, Emily.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Ben.
No worries.
Enjoy your afternoon. Bye.
Bye. The Rev Up is brought to you by Trust the Process. If you're a small to medium-sized business and want to grow your business but need help to find the best people with the right skills and at the right price, or you want to utilize technology to systemize your business, you can find us at www.trusttheprocess.com.au. See you next time.